Hi, welcome to the Codex Ashes channel. So today we're going to be discussing an artwork known as the Buga sphere. Now this artwork is often misidentified as a sign of extraterrestrial life. However, I'm going to be looking at it as if it was an art piece. So I hope you guys enjoy this video. Personally, I'm not a fan of the Buga sphere artwork at all. The Buga sphere was found in nearby vegetation after it allegedly had been seen flying over the town of Buga, Colombia on the 2nd of March 2025. The silver spherical object is described as being a metallic orb made from an aluminium alloy with unidentified markings and engravings on it. The Buga sphere is an aluminium alloy piece with a ring surrounding it. The ring itself resembles an equator with black dots that were allegedly made of a shell-based resin, carbon dating to about 12,500 years. Half of the sphere appears smooth, with no noticeable markings, while the other half appears to be engraved. The engraved design allows us to focus on the unknown glyphs, or iconography, that appears rather linear, but also symbolic, allowing it to feel almost familiar in some way. But here's the thing. The reason why it appears familiar is because that design, in fact, is of a microchip, which can be found in various forms of technology today. It's a design standard, and it can be seen in things like computers and cell phones or things that reference them. Many of the references in the chip design itself developed from practical use. The thing is, there's no way that this artwork can be 12,500 years old. This is why it's considered alien, because that 12,500 year carbon date makes no sense based off the technology of the time. But the thing is, art often skews the dates because the mediums used are often recycled or made from things that are available to the artist. So it's important to understand the iconography. So what do we know about the iconography, the art or the designs on it? The microchip design should give us a clue that it is a modern design. The reason why we know it's a more modern design is because the first practical microchips or integrated circuits came from the 1950s. Jack Kilby built the first working integrated circuit in 1958, and Robert Noyce independently developed what is now the foundation for modern microchips, a silicon-based integrated circuit, in 1959. So over time, these designs evolved via practical use into what we know today and what we will see in a lot of art and design today. As you can see in these reference images, this is clearly a microchip inspired design. Now, this problem with carbon dating and art is art often causes a skewing of carbon dating. This leads people to misidentify things as hoaxes or alien technology because they aren't aware of the actual mediums and techniques artists use or the various forms of experimentation that the artist may use. For example, we have carbon dated it to 12,500 years because of a shell-based resin. But the thing is, there is a shell-based resin often used in art and construction known as bitumen. Now, bitumen is a naturally occurring petroleum-based tar-like resin used since prehistoric times as a natural adhesive, sealant, pigment, and binder. It naturally forms in marine sedimentary environments and is created from ancient sea life, shell organisms, and marine sediments. This leads tests to be skewed when those traces are present if the bitumen is not too old. Because they are fossilized, some forms of bitumen, these organisms cannot be carbon dated. So the carbon dating is faulty as is. So in Colombia, bitumen itself is actually seen in certain places as deposits. However, there are no known deposits in Buga. However, the asphalt production plants in and near Buga sometimes use bitumen as an ingredient in making road pavings. So for anybody who has not seen bitumen, you can go outside and look at the road. The tarred road, you'll notice that black color from freshly tarred road. It looks very similar to the dots on the Bugosphere. It is because of the bitumen-based paving materials that are likely used. Now you can find bitumen as an ingredient in bitumen-based waterproofing, coatings, sealants, and various other art mediums in hardware stores and in art stores. So they usually are industrial grade, but they are used a lot in art. So they will skew the carbon dating. There are these mysterious copper dots, perhaps a sign of an unknown technology used, along with unknown text that has been compared to various forms of linear text known in ancient times from around the world. But here's the thing. Copper is known for its ability to conduct electricity and prevent overheating on a circuit board. This makes sense considering the fact that they referenced an integrated circuit in the design itself. So the artist clearly did this on purpose. But the reference to conductivity, the circuit boards, tells us that the artist knows a thing or two about circuits. So there is also a lot of mistakes on the artwork itself. The legend himself, the Armoured Skeptic, pointed out that various mistakes were found on this artwork. The thing is, these mistakes tell us one thing about the artist. The artist isn't too familiar with the engraving tools used. If it was made by hand, which it likely was, the artist itself was more likely to make mistakes. So it's not a machine design, it is a handmade design. It's got handmade characteristics. It uses more traditional techniques because you've got various other ways of engraving, but traditional engraving has mistakes. Traditional engraving has these individuation characteristics that occur naturally due to people's motor habits, motor skills, and experience with the artwork and the medium used while they're creating the art piece. So another thing we need to keep in mind is that aluminium alloy could have also been chosen because it is a good conductor. So pure aluminium is known for its high electrical conductivity and is often used in electrical applications. However, when something is alloyed, it means it's mixed with other metals, and this reduces conductivity, but it also changes the effect of how metal interacts with the environment. So we need to also understand that aluminium itself is known to be very good at conducting sound vibrations. And in certain spiritual practices, when you do certain prayers, you hit certain notes, which creates certain vibrations, which those are actually the vibrations that you want to have the spiritual experience, because if you're more sensitive to the vibration, your senses might blend in order to experience that vibration in a more intense way, at least from my experience. Aluminium itself has low density, high stiffness, and low internal dampening, which allows the vibrations to travel more easily. So the person who designed this knows about circuitry, they know about conductivity, and they know how vibrations work. So it's clearly somebody that likes technology. And there's a lot of emphasis on the characteristics of the aluminium itself, while completely ignoring the overall piece. This is not something you should do when it comes to art. I know in scientific studies they tell you to focus on individual things, but it is in fact a piece, like a full-blown object that you are looking at, if you're going to focus on the properties of aluminium and be shocked about the properties of aluminium, which are normal properties of aluminium, then you are missing the bigger picture. If you look at the artwork, you'll notice that the microchip itself is placed in a way that kind of forces it to be the focal point. It also helps that it is a spherical object. All these iconographies are referenced in esoteric design. All of them tend to be symbols of the psyche, though. Okay, so if the sun is a positive, the moon would be negative charges, that sort of thing. But that's all symbolism you'll find in various forms of art. So if we look at the artist itself and we find out more about the artwork, we might discover something like the reason why they've got stars made out of crescent moons and stuff. It has to do with the charge or the symbolic charge of the piece, okay? Now, when it comes to the lines, line is seen as a continuous mark made on a surface that are known to have psychological effects. This is why when you study art, one of the first exercises you learn is how to express certain thought patterns and emotions with line, because line is both self and other. And when it comes to writing, most writing styles develop from line work. So having a linear style text isn't really signs that it's an ancient text, because most texts, in fact pretty much all text, is linear in nature in some form or another. So if you consider the fact that line is a basic building block when it comes to art and design, and it can be found across cultures throughout history and is often dependent on the medium and methods used, you will see that saying that the artwork itself, that these lines, this linear text, is a sign of it being extraterrestrial or an unknown ancient language is quite an interesting take. The fact that it's a line kind of proves that it's human as well. Now, it is said that it was made by human hand. Well, that's obvious because it's a human-made artwork. And various understandings of line can be seen across cultures. So if you want to actually understand why it's linear, you can actually read various books on line itself. It's actually become philosophical discussions. It's considered in mathematical concepts, various arts, various genres, various things. They discuss line in general. So saying that these lines are proof that it is ancient text, it's a little bit tone deaf. For example, Greek culture lines predated painting, and a single word was made to hold the collective ideas of writing, drawing, and painting, allowing the line to bring forth something out of nothingness. That was a Greek understanding. Then you got the linear nature of text can be seen as a sign of humanity. There's another saying that the line is a dot that went for a walk. Lines are the oldest form of human expression. It is the formation of human thought and creation. That is another belief with regards to line that is seen in the mind of an artist and in these discussions. So the most of the ancient texts that have been compared to the Buga sphere is linear, but has nothing to do with each other, because it's the nature of mark making itself that it's linear. It's not the fact that it is alien because it's linear. It's not the fact that it's ancient because it's linear. It's the fact that it is a mark that made it linear. And if you are engraving something, it's easier to make certain lines than other ones. And considering the fact that there's a lot of mistakes in the artwork, you can actually see why it does have these style lines. And some markings are marks of expression, some markings are marks of symbolism, some markings are linguistic, some are graphic. When you listen to the discussions of the sphere, you can see the person doesn't understand the basics of the power of a mere line. So the person doesn't understand why the line is this powerful, why it's this symbolic, and why an artist would make these decisions. And if you cannot understand the mind of the artist, if you cannot recognize that this is in fact a microchip, that these lines come from the practical use and creation of microchips that it's referenced, you don't know the conductivity and the electrical nature of these items, you're kind of missing a lot of the thought pattern of this artwork and this artist in general. It is evidence that the only thing that's alienated here is the thought, or rather the thinking patterns of an artist in this discussion. See, the linear glyphs encased in another design resembling 5 crescent moons, each with a circle in their center, together creating a star. There are also triangles with similar circles giving an illusion of another star hiding in the design. There is a possibility of hinting to more esoteric themes, such as triangles that are often associated with elements like fire, water, air, earth, and this is often accompanied by ether, which could explain the artist might be hinting towards that in the design. You can also arguably say that in the ether is the energy. So a lot of discussions about ether involve the movement of energy. Possibility that it could be energy related is again referenced. So the artist itself might be hinting towards those sorts of things in the design. Circles often represent wholeness or golds, and gold is also a metal that conducts energy. The scientific fields, triangles often refer to heat, and the circles often refer to a catalyst. Considering copper is often used to prevent overheating, perhaps this is another hint. Crescent moons often represent growth, potential, intuition, or change. The circle within them could represent the sun. Alternatively, the moons create a star like the sun, which often is associated with masculine energy. It is light and dark hidden in plain sight, suggesting a balanced system. Now, light and dark can also be positive and negative. That also could be part of the symbolism. Perhaps the design is hinting towards internal universe rather than an external universe if we want to go all philosophical. Perhaps they are hinting towards more alchemical thought patterns, although this seems more technology based, to be honest. And there are several mistakes present, but the linear nature itself is more towards the tools used than the actual design. And you can see the person used various techniques. So the Buga sphere has been compared to Nordic runes. This is because of the angular glyphs used in Nordic runes. But there is, in my opinion, nothing that suggests this has to be a possibility. If you look at it, they look nothing alike. It has been compared to Celtic script, but there's nothing Celtic in the piece. It has been compared to cuneiform, which is the most popular comparison. Cuneiform is also the oldest writing style, and it is the most ancient known writing style. And as you can see, they look nothing alike, and nor is there any evidence that points towards cuneiform. The linear nature of the glyphs in the Buga sphere likely is there because throughout history, the linear nature is directly linked to the tools used by the artist, and then the design develops over time. So I don't think the artist itself was necessarily skilled enough to use various other methods than what they eventually settled on. So it is said that the alien life craftsmanship is also largely up for debate because the alien craftsmanship shows advanced understanding of technology despite the design being quite untidy. Now here's the thing, it's not an advanced understanding of any form of technology, it's a basic understanding of circuitry and conductivity. I should know because I understand the piece, and that's my level of understanding. The next thing I'd like to point out is that even though a community appears more advanced, it is very much like what happens in the human psyche. So similar to humans, the more advanced a person appears, the less creative they become. So in a visual mind, you might start out having more freedom to explore different styles. You might explore more techniques. You might explore more art movements. You might break and reimagine rules. You might find other ways to express yourself. But over time, you become forced to conform to a belief system, a thought pattern, and you are taught to focus on what sells and what the large population prefers. So you kind of end up doing what people expect and advise you to do instead of experimenting over time with various techniques. And the lack of experimentation can seem alien when you are someone that experiments, just like when you are somebody that doesn't experiment with these various forms of art styles. Your work might seem alien to someone that doesn't experience those things. So a lot of people today are taught to mimic what the next person does. They don't explore various mediums on their own. And that can be seen in various artworks that appear alien to certain individuals and certain designs. So if you are unfamiliar with a microchip, which would be very shocking if people today are unfamiliar with it, but it appears to be a thing, then maybe if you see a microchip, you would think it's alien. Maybe. But the thing is, over time, the more civilized you are, the less creative you are. So this is also seen as a form of cultural stagnation of the civilized communities that is often observed, where a person would rather avoid risks that might make them stand out, which leads to fewer ideas and encourages one to suppress themselves. Now, if somebody broke that rule, which is often seen by the artist, they will be seen as other to the general population. So it's also kind of why we lost a lot of techniques of the old, and more modern technology causes us to lose the techniques of various artists. So there's a lot of things in history we don't understand because the knowledge has been lost, because we just don't have the same standards as what they had. Because remember, they used these arts techniques over generations. They learned the skill. A lot of artists learned from a teacher. It took them 4 years. They were apprentices. They did nothing but create these pieces for generations. Now, it's obviously not in the Buga sphere because it's clearly not done by a professional. However, it tells us that the issue of people losing understanding of the arts is still very much present today if we look at how the Buga sphere itself is seen as alien, because they have alienated the artist. Creativity is often linked to early development, both in human development as well in historical human evolution. Okay, so you can see this. As a child, you had a more creative mind. You were more outspoken, you thought more. As you became older, you became less creative. So that's something that happens in history as well. So you can pay attention to that and you'll notice when something sticks out. What kind of leads to the loss of craftsmanship and the loss of creativity and this more fantastical thought, because your imagination is running away from yourself. So the force of limitations to your own personal mind can directly affect your interpretation, which leads to like fears of rejections and not understanding certain guidelines and not understanding how certain things in history work because you weren't taught that sort of thing. So if you weren't taught what a microchip was, if you weren't taught about the conductive nature of certain elements, it might seem alien to you. It might seem advanced to you. It might seem unrealistic. It might seem like a hoax to you. But it's just a misinterpretation because you don't understand the way art works in general. So I understand that the researchers apparently want to prove that it is in fact alien technology, but it depends on what kind of alien do they believe it is. Do they believe it is alien technology as an extraterrestrial from outer space? Or do they believe it in the symbolic nature that each human is in fact a universe of their own and it is alien to that specific group of people? because they don't understand the piece. So that's also something we need to consider when we look at the Buga, because it's not a hoax because it's made. But there's a thing, what can happen is you can gaslight yourself into believing that it's extraterrestrial because you don't recognize where you recognize those symbols, and you don't understand enough about art to know that you are referencing those symbols. So the problem I've noticed is they rely heavily on carbon dating on things like the Buga, and they completely overlook the basic rules of the arts and how to actually find something's chronological order. For example, when you're studying the arts, visual or graphic, you are often required to use far more methods than simply carbon-14 dating, because of the unreliable nature of the fact that the techniques artists use often skew the dates. So you can't get an accurate chronological time period just by using carbon dating. So there are other methods that they will use, like contextual layering of and around the object. So if you know that certain layers are lower than others, like if something is that old, it will be dirty under lots of dirt, it will be buried, then you can actually understand, okay, so this sphere was actually quite clean, so it's unlikely to be ancient because it's not dirty enough. And yes, it was flying around, but if it was ancient, it wouldn't be able to fly around anymore because too much time would have passed. It would have been under dirt because it fell. It hasn't flown since. That's the thing. You must think about those sorts of things. Then we also can look at the damage and erosion on the object, if it's possible, if there's wear and tear and environmental factors that could have impacted the object. The object looks still quite new, so it's unlikely to be so old. If we look at the iconography or look for similarities in the object, but we can't rely on the fact that certain things are linear, because linear is a basic element. So you can't look at it and use that as an excuse to say this is made with ancient text. You need to understand, like, okay, so this is linear. This reminds me of ancient text, but it's likely because of the tools that are used. Because the symbols aren't found in anything decent, trust me. Anybody who's referencing ancient text to that knows nothing about the iconography or texts. Okay, so if we look at the culture and the environmental factors that not only led to the creation of the piece, but the possible thinking patterns present at the time. So, like we said earlier, the fact that this person understands what an integrated circuit is. The fact that this person recognizes what is an insulator and what is a conductor. The fact that this person references a lot of things associated with the psyche that is also associated with the movement of energy. So all of that we need to think about, because it hints towards the styles and techniques that would have been present and used by the artist, and what kind of habits they in fact would have had, which can be reflected from the time period. You'll notice in one of Skeptic's videos when he discussed aliens, he mentioned that if you have aliens from certain periods of time, their spacecraft changes to match that time. It's symbolic because it evolves. Need to keep in mind about the various techniques or the lack of techniques that are popular in certain time periods. We need to recognize the properties of the material itself, which is what they're testing for scientifically, but it's overlooking the artwork completely and the symbolism. We need to focus on the manufacturing errors if it's present, as well as technologies that were available at the belief time period. Now, if you look at the Buga, there's nothing in the Buga that would have been available 12,500 years ago. So again, that tells us it's not from that time period. We also look at any biological residue and pigmentation, which might not be useful in this scenario, but we do look at various things. It's multiple things at once, because things don't exist in a closed system in the real world. In the real world, things are layered. Things have a lot of possibilities. I would like to point out that if I was the individual that was studying the Buga, I would not see it as being alien technology, based off the video you can tell. I would have seen it as being a person's attempt to express themselves and their understanding of circuitry and conductivity in a more artistic manner, right down to the mistakes they made. Because people make mistakes in calculations all the time, people make mistakes in design, and I think it just shows that this person was very human. The only thing that's alienated here is common sense and the artist itself. And if I was under the impression that this was alien technology, I would ask someone to throw me in the head with the Buga, like a shot put. You push it, because apparently it gets heavier over time. But the reason I would say that is because clearly something else is fronting. So we want something decent to front that understands how the world works. And we are going to use the fact that the Buga can fly to get to the target. Okay? Because we're going to go for IT crowd methods, turn it off and on again. Because sometimes you need to use the old-fashioned methods in order to realize that this is not extraterrestrial. It is very much man-made, and it is, in my opinion, the worst artwork I've ever seen. But to each their own. Honestly, I probably would have liked it because of the mistakes and stuff. I do like art that has a lot of mistakes and errors. I probably would have liked it had it not gotten the hype. To be blunt with you, the hype itself kind of screwed me over. And it's been a while since I actually did a discussion like this. I've been a little sick, as usual, and I've been quite antisocial, so I lost quite a bit of my vocabulary. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video.